On July 1, 2007, family members gathered in mourning to bury Ashraf Marwan, the son-in-law of the legendary Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. 4 days earlier, in circumstances that still generate controversy today, the 63-year-old man had fallen from the balcony of his luxurious London apartment, ending a life that oscillated between apparent loyalty to Egypt and a secret betrayal that shaped the destiny of the Middle East. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, unable to attend the funeral due to diplomatic commitments, offered his condolences by declaring Marwan a true patriot of the country. However, behind this public tribute, a much more complex and disturbing truth was whispered. For years, that man, respected in Cairo's power circles, had operated as one of the most effective agents in modern espionage history, serving the Mossad, the feared Israeli intelligence agency, at a time when Arabs and Israelis were engaged in a silent war that would define the balance of power in the region. Ashraf Marwan's trajectory as a spy began long before his mysterious death, rooted in an explosive combination of personal ambition, family humiliation, and calculated opportunism. Born into a family of military and religious prestige in Egypt, Marwan seemed destined for a respectable career within the Egyptian establishment. His father held the rank of Major General, while his grandfather had served as the head of the Sharia courts, giving him impeccable credentials within the traditional Egyptian hierarchy. This privileged lineage, combined with his background as a military chemist, should have guaranteed a smooth ascent in power circles. However, fate had prepared a much more tortuous and dangerous path for that ambitious young man who from an early age demonstrated a worrying predilection for luxury and opportunities that could accelerate his social climbing. The relationship with the Nasser family proved fundamental to understanding how a promising young man transformed into one of the most effective traders in modern Egyptian history. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the charismatic leader who had nationalized the Suez Canal and become a symbol of Arab nationalism, never harbored sympathy for his daughter, Mona's Suda. The president perceived characteristics in Marwan that he considered incompatible with the revolutionary values he preached: an excessive thirst for social status, a dangerous attraction to Western luxury, and especially an opportunism that made him uncomfortable. Despite the paternal reservations, Mona Nasser insisted on the relationship, and in July 1966, the marriage was celebrated definitively, linking Marwan's destiny to the center of Egyptian power. This union, which should have represented the pinnacle of his social ambitions, ended up becoming the first step toward a double life that would jeopardize not only his own existence, but also the Cairo regime's most closely guarded secrets. Soon after the wedding, Marwan left for London with the goal of pursuing a master's degree in chemistry, a decision that on the surface seemed natural for an educated and ambitious young man. However, away from family scrutiny and the social constraints of Cairo, he plunged into a lifestyle that revealed his true personality. London casinos became his refuge, and in a short time, gambling debts accumulated alarmingly, forcing him to depend on the generosity of friends to avoid more serious consequences. When Nasser discovered the extent of his son-in-law's financial problems, his reaction was immediate and humiliating. The future spy was summarily repatriated to Cairo, where he was allocated to the presidential office with the lowest possible salary under the direct supervision of Sami Sharif, Nasser's chief of staff, and a man known for his unwavering loyalty to the regime. For an individual who cultivated dreams of wealth and power, this position represented not only a punishment, but a profound humiliation that would plant the seeds of his eventual act of betrayal. Ashraf Marwan's transformation from problematic son-in-law to secret agent did not happen immediately, but was the result of a series of psychological and practical factors that converged to create the perfect conditions for espionage. Nasser's evident disdain, combined with his humiliating position in the government and his constant need for money, created fertile ground for recruitment. During one of his study trips to London, possibly motivated by anger, greed, or simply the adrenaline of danger, Marwan made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the course of Middle Eastern history. In a red telephone booth, an iconic symbol of the British capital, he dialed the number of the Israeli embassy, offering his services as an informer. This first contact, although thwarted by technical difficulties, established the pattern of clandestine communication that would characterize his career as a spy. When he finally managed to establish contact in late 1970, Marwan was answered by Major General Shul of the Israel Defense Forces, a man experienced in intelligence operations, who immediately recognized the extraordinary potential of that unexpected phone call. I'll insisted on a face-to-face meeting at the embassy, but Marwan, already demonstrating the caution that would characterize his spying career, refused to expose himself in that way. The initial conversation did not yield concrete results, but when casually mentioned the name Ashraf Marwan to two senior Mossad officers, the reaction was one of shock and disbelief. As later documented by Uri Joseph in his investigative work, agents Vardy, Goran, and the station chief in London exchanged glances with a mixture of surprise and professional excitement. They knew the name very well, as Mossad had already identified Nasser's son-in-law as a potential target for recruitment. The Israeli agency was aware of his financial problems, his passion for gambling, and most importantly, his emotional vulnerability resulting from the tense relationship with his father-in-law. He was exactly the type of profile that espionage manuals described as ideal for conversion, privileged access to sensitive information, financial and personal motivations for betrayal, and a personality susceptible to sophisticated psychological manipulation. The first formal meeting between Marwan and his future Mossad handlers was carefully orchestrated in a London hotel away from the curious eyes of the Israeli embassy. The agency sent its second man in the London station, an operative fluent in Arabic known only by the code name Dubby, whose charismatic personality and persuasion skills had been tested in previous operations in the Middle East. The meeting proved to be an extraordinary success, establishing an immediate chemistry between the novice spy and his experienced handler. Marwan demonstrated that he possessed not only charm and intelligence, but also an instinctive understanding of the risks and opportunities inherent in international espionage. Even more impressively, he did not arrive at the meeting empty-handed. As proof of his credentials and privileged access, Marwan brought with him an ultra-secret memorandum that meticulously detailed Egyptian military capabilities, combat units, strategic positions, responsible commanders, available equipment, and operational readiness levels. It was exactly the kind of intelligence Israel desperately needed to maintain its strategic advantage over its Arab neighbors, and the quality of the information exceeded all expectations of the Mossad officers. The designation of the code name the Angel for Ashraf Marwan was not casual, but reflected both the strategic importance and the almost mystical value that the Israeli agency attributed to its new source. The name was inspired by the television series The Saint, which was broadcast in Israel. Under that title and portrayed a charismatic protagonist capable of solving seemingly impossible problems through intelligence and charm. For Israeli strategists, a man with direct access to the inner circle of Egyptian power represented an almost divine answer to their intelligence needs in a region where precise information could mean the difference between victory and total defeat. The death of Gamal Abdel Nasser in September 1970 created a unique opportunity for Marwan to expand his influence and consequently his value as an intelligence source. The devastating Egyptian defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel captured the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golden Heights in less than a week, had haunted Nasser until his last days, undermining his already fragile health. and his confidence in the Arab military. Future. With the ascent of Sadat to the presidency, a man NASA had underestimated, considering him harmless and politically naive, Marwan saw his prospects change dramatically. Sadat, determined to consolidate his power and distance himself from the shadow of his predecessor, moved quickly to reshape the Egyptian government. In 1971, he executed a systematic purge of the Nasserist old guard, eliminating potential rivals and creating space for new faces in the center of power. In this process of political renewal, Marwan emerged as a reliable and competent figure, quickly gaining the new president's trust and ascending to the position of Sadat's personal advisor. This extraordinary proximity to the Egyptian leader automatically transformed Marwan's value as an intelligence source, granting him access to information that few individuals in the Arab world possessed. During the beginning of 1971, Cairo's strategic objectives became crystal clear through the reports Marwan religiously transmitted to his Mossad handlers. The recovery of the Sinai Peninsula had become Sadat's central obsession, not only as a matter of national pride, but as a political necessity to legitimize his government before a people still traumatized by the humiliation of 1967. However, the military assessments Marwan was able to access revealed that Sadat, despite his bellicose rhetoric, privately recognized the limitations of his army and did not consider his forces prepared for an immediate confrontation with Israel. This information faithfully transmitted through Dubby to the upper echelons of Israeli intelligence reinforced the perception in Tel Aviv that Egypt would maintain its defensive posture for a prolonged period, allowing Israel to concentrate its resources on other strategic priorities. The Israeli analysis of Egyptian military capability was based on premises that seemed solid at the time but would later prove dangerously simplistic. Israel's military and political leaders firmly believed that Egypt would not dare to launch a major offensive until it possessed long-range fighter bombers capable of neutralizing Israeli air superiority, particularly the feared F-4 Phantoms of the Israeli Air Force. Zad had in fact pinned his hopes on the MiG-23 jets, the Soviet Air Force's most modern long-range aircraft, but this equipment had not yet entered mass production, creating a temporal gap that Israeli strategists interpreted as a window of opportunity to consolidate their defensive positions. Marwan's reports arrived directly at the top of the Israeli hierarchy, including Prime Minister Gulam, Defense Minister Mashidian, and the Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, Chim Barv, without passing through intermediate layers of analysis that could dilute or distort their original content. The information Marwan was able to access and transmit included verbatim accounts of private conversations between Sadat and Soviet leader Leonid Brev, revealing extraordinary details about the military support Moscow was willing to provide to Egypt. Among the most significant revelations was Soviet commitments to supply Kelt air-to-surface missiles, launched from 216 bombers capable of hitting strategic targets in Israeli territory. This information allowed Israel to anticipate and prepare countermeasures for threats that were still developing, conferring an invaluable strategic advantage in an environment where technological superiority and advanced intelligence often determine the outcome of conflicts. Sadat trusted Marwan not only as an advisor, but as a facilitator, capable of materializing complex and sensitive agreements that the Egyptian regime could not openly negotiate. One of the most audacious operations facilitated by Marwan involved the secret acquisition of Mirage 5 fighters through Libya, bypassing the French embargo that prohibited direct sales of arms to countries involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict. This operation demonstrated not only Marwan's influence behind the scenes of Arab diplomacy, but also his ability to profit personally from his privileged position. He systematically charged substantial commissions on state deals, with one importer even presenting him with a check for $1 million after a successful order for Mercedes vehicles. Despite accumulating a considerable personal fortune through these parallel activities, Marwan continued to accept the $10,000 the Mossad paid him for each meeting, demonstrating that his motivations transcended purely financial matters and included psychological elements related to the thrill of risk and duplicity. During the summer of 1972, the strategic landscape in the Middle East began to shift in ways that would have deeply alarmed Israeli analysts if they had fully grasped the implications of the information Marwan was transmitting. Sadat made the surprising decision to expel the Soviet military advisors who had defended Egyptian airspace since the War of Attrition, a move that was initially interpreted in Israel as evidence of Egyptian military weakening. However, the reality was much more complex and threatening. Sadat had become frustrated with Moscow's reluctance to support an offensive war against Israel, fearing that such a conflict could provoke a dangerous escalation with Washington and compromise the damp policy that the Soviets had been carefully cultivating. The expulsion of the Soviet advisors represented, in fact, a liberation from the restrictions Moscow had imposed on Egyptian military ambitions, creating space for Sadat to develop an independent and potentially more aggressive military strategy. In June 1973, Marwan transmitted information that should have revolutionized the Israeli perception of Egyptian intentions, but which was filtered through analytical biases that minimized its importance. According to his sources, in the Egyptian High Command, Egypt had decided to proceed with war preparations without awaiting the arrival of long-range fighter bombers, abandoning what the Israelis considered an essential prerequisite for any serious offensive. The military plan Marwan was able to access revealed a sophisticated and realistic strategy. Egyptian forces would cross the Suez Canal at 5 different points using 5 infantry divisions to establish a territorial strip approximately 10 kilometers deep, protected by a dense network of Soviet-made anti-aircraft missiles that would neutralize Israeli air superiority in the immediate combat zone. Simultaneously, Syrian forces would attack from the north in the Golan Heights, forcing Israel to divide its limited military resources between two active fronts. The cleverest aspect of the Egyptian strategy was its deliberately limited nature. Cairo never informed Damascus that the advance would be halted after achieving modest territorial objectives, fearing that Syria might reject a plan that did not contemplate more ambitious territorial gains. Sadat's true intention was not to conquer all of Sinai through military operations, but to create enough pressure to force American diplomatic intervention and negotiate the Israeli withdrawal from the peninsula through political agreements. It was a strategy of limited war with specific political objectives, much more sophisticated and dangerous than Israel was prepared to face. On October 4, 1973, Marwan made a desperate call to his handler, Dubby, using coded language that conveyed the extreme urgency of the situation. He needed to see the general immediately to discuss many chemicals codes that Dubby instantly recognized as references to the MSAD director, Zizimir, and the imminence of war. The need to speak in code reflected the fact that Marwan was not alone at the time of the call, forcing him to communicate vital information through language that would appear innocuous to casual listeners but carried deadly meaning for those who knew the established communication system. Zamir was woken up at 2 in the morning with the urgent message at a time that would prove historically crucial. It was the eve of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, when virtually all of Israeli society withdraws for fasting and prayer. The decision Golden would face in the coming hours would test not only her personal leadership, but also Israel's ability to react quickly to existential threats. Marwan's warning arrived with less than 48 hours' notice, an extremely limited time frame to mobilize Israeli military reserves and prepare adequate defenses against a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. The Prime Minister faced a complex strategic dilemma: launch a preemptive strike that would demonstrate military preparedness, but would also make Israel appear as the aggressor before the international community, potentially compromising the American support that was vital for national survival. Alternatively, she could opt for a defensive posture discreetly, mobilizing the reserves and hoping that Israeli military superiority would be sufficient to repel any Arab attack, even with limited preparation. Golden opted for an intermediate strategy that, in retrospect, proved inadequate for the magnitude of the threat Israel faced. She rejected the option of a preemptive strike, prioritizing the maintenance of international support and avoiding Israel being perceived as the aggressor in a regional conflict. However, she authorized the call-up of reservists, albeit on a limited scale due to persistent skepticism within the Israeli military high command about the credibility of the threat. Chief of Staff David Elazar, who possessed considerable experience in military operations, firmly believed that an attack was imminent and warned his colleagues that the message is authentic. And for us, this is a very short warning. His professional assessment was based not only on Marwan's information, but also on other intelligence indicators that suggested anomalous military movements in neighboring Arab countries. However, Elazar, head of Israeli military intelligence, remained inflexibly attached to the theory that Egypt would not attack without possessing long-range fighters, a premise that had become almost dogmatic within the Israeli intelligence community. Mossad, defense minister and military hero of previous wars, supported Zer's assessment and reacted with irritation to suggestions of mass mobilization, declaring emphatically that you can't call up the whole system just because of some messages from Zvika, referring disdainfully to the Mossad director. This institutional resistance to the intelligence provided by Marwan reflected not only analytical biases, but also the overconfidence resulting from previous Israeli military victories, particularly the overwhelming triumph of 1967, which had created a sense of invincibility that would prove dangerously illusory. As a result of this collective failure of assessment, Israel failed to fully mobilize its armored divisions before the start of the offensive on October 6, 1973 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Egyptian forces crossed the Suez Canal at multiple points, rapidly overwhelming the Bar-Lev line, a chain of fortifications built along the eastern bank of the canal that had been considered practically impenetrable by Israeli strategists. Operation Ber, the name given by the Egyptians to their offensive, demonstrated a level of coordination and military effectiveness that completely surprised the Israeli defenders. Israeli tanks arrived on the battlefield in an uncoordinated manner and were systematically destroyed by Egyptian anti-tank missiles, revealing that Israeli technological superiority had been neutralized by tactics and equipment that military analysts had not adequately anticipated. Simultaneously, in the north, Syrian forces launched their own offensive through the Golden Heights, creating exactly the two-front war scenario that the Egyptian planners had foreseen.